In response to Donald Trump's foreign policy, European leaders have agreed to massively increase their defence spending over the next few years. In Germany, leaders are planning to increase their share for defence by changing the country's constitution. Deutsche Welle correspondent Thomas Sparrow joins us now from Berlin. Thomas, g'day. So how are German leaders planning to amend the constitution?
Germany has a so-called debt brake, which essentially means that it can only borrow very little money every year. In previous years, that was seen as a sensible decision because essentially it promoted fiscal responsibility. You may remember that that was one of Germany's key foreign policy issues during the European crisis, financial crisis, a few years ago. However, that came also with a price, namely that investment in infrastructure and defense was not very high. And that's why there have been calls in recent years, especially given the new international developments, crises, wars, etc., that Germany needs to change that debt law, so that debt brake, so that it can essentially invest more money in infrastructure and defense. Now, the problem is that in order to carry that out, the parliament has to approve such a measure with a two-thirds majority. And with the previous parliament, before the election on February 23rd, the parties that want to amend the constitution could have that majority. But the new parliament, the one that is going to come into power once the new chancellor is in place, they don't have the two-thirds majority. So what's being discussed now is to what extent the parties that had a majority in the previous parliament can actually pass such an amendment. It's very complex, it's complicated and difficult, and there's a lot of discussion as to whether that's legal and also legitimate to make those changes. But it all boils down to the question, how can Germany get more money in order to spend more on defence and infrastructure?
It does sound complex, Thomas. So are Germans on board with those proposed changes?
Yes, according to nationwide polls, most Germans want the government to spend more money both on defence and on infrastructure. And they also favour Germany changing its debt brake in order to have more money that they can borrow. Now, this is a significant change because for a long time, Germans were actually in favour of this so-called debt brake because they believed that it was up to Germany and it was Germany's responsibility, essentially, to guarantee fiscal responsibility and to make sure that younger generations in the future do not end up having the burden of paying for all the interest that you get when you get these loans. But this is changing specifically because of the new international scenario, because of Donald Trump's pressure, because of the idea also at a European level that Europe needs to do much more for its own defense and that it cannot rely as much as it did on the United States in the past. So that is a significant change and many Germans are on board. The big question is whether Parliament will actually approve those changes to the Constitution.
And has the government revealed exactly how it plans to spend these funds on defence?
Not exactly, not specifically, but the shopping list is a very long shopping list. It includes, obviously, investing more in security here in the country, investing more in capabilities for Germany's armed forces, investing more in capabilities also for Germany's armed forces, international operations, for example, in the Baltic states. But what opposition parties in particular are also asking is that the German government in particular does not only focus on defense spending, but that it also focuses a lot on infrastructure, on basically using more money for schools, for the healthcare system, for bridges, for the train system. So this is something that is extremely controversial in the country, basically to what extent you're going to use the money that you're going to get both for defense and infrastructure, and it will be up to the new government once it's in place to determine exactly how they invest that money.
OK, Thomas Sparrow there in Berlin. A boulder in the grounds of a Queensland school for decades has been found to be covered in more than 60